The first time I saw humans in battle, I thought they were insane. My name is Zektar, and I belong to the Velnari species, beings of logic, calculation, and precise energy manipulation. We had been part of the Galactic Defense Coalition for over 3 centuries, contributing our advanced plasma weapons and tactical analysis to keep the peace across 17 star systems. When the Korthak invasion began, everything changed. These weren't the usual pirates or territorial disputes we'd handled before. The Korthak were a hive-minded species that consumed entire planets, leaving nothing but barren rock in their wake. Their ships moved like living things, adapting to our strategies faster than our computers could calculate new ones. The coalition was desperate. We'd lost 4 systems in 2 months, and our traditional methods weren't working. That's when they brought in the humans, a relatively new species that had only joined the coalition 50 years ago. Most of us older races considered them primitive, barely beyond their nuclear age when first contact was made. I was assigned to the battleship Eternal Vigilance as a weapons coordinator. My job was to synchronize our plasma arrays with the ship's targeting systems, ensuring maximum efficiency in combat. Everything was mathematical, predictable, and clean. At least it was supposed to be. The human contingent arrived 3 days before our next engagement. Their ships looked different. Rougher, more aggressive, with angular designs that seemed to prioritize function over the elegant curves we Velnari preferred. But it was the humans themselves that caught my attention. They were loud, constantly talking, laughing, even joking about the upcoming battle. This behavior confused me. How could they find humor in the face of potential death? My people approached combat with solemn determination, understanding the mathematical probabilities of survival and accepting them with quiet dignity. Captain Sarah Chen was their commanding officer, a small human female with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths I couldn't measure. When she met with our command staff, she spoke with confidence that bordered on arrogance. "The Korthak fight like a machine," she said, her voice carrying across the briefing room. "Predictable patterns, optimal solutions, perfect coordination. That's exactly why they've been winning." Admiral Tolvek, our commanding officer, shifted his crystalline features into what we recognized as skepticism. "And you propose we abandon proven tactical doctrine for chaos?" Captain Chen smiled, an expression that showed her teeth in what I had learned was either friendliness or aggression among humans. "Not chaos, Admiral, humanity." I didn't understand what she meant then. The concept seemed impossibly vague, lacking any quantifiable parameters I could analyze. How could an abstract quality of a species be weaponized? The next morning I witnessed something that challenged everything I thought I knew about combat effectiveness. The humans were conducting training exercises on the ship's main deck, but they weren't following any recognizable patterns. Instead of the synchronized movements my people used, each human seemed to be fighting their own individual battle. One human soldier would dive behind cover while another charged forward. A third would provide covering fire from an impossible angle, while a fourth did something that could only be described as dancing between energy blasts. There was no mathematical elegance to their movements, no predictable algorithms I could follow. Yet somehow it worked. Their casualty rates in simulation were lower than ours, and they completed objectives faster than teams with superior equipment and training. When I asked Captain Chen to explain their methodology, she gave me that tooth-showing expression again. "We don't think about it," she said simply. "We feel it." This answer frustrated me beyond measure. Feeling wasn't quantifiable. It couldn't be programmed into targeting computers or analyzed for optimal outcomes. How could something so subjective be more effective than our precise calculations? The Korthak attacked 2 days later. Their fleet emerged from hyperspace like a dark wave, ships numbering in the thousands. Our sensors immediately began calculating trajectories, weapon ranges, and probability matrices. The data flowed across my screens in neat, organized patterns that my mind processed with comfortable familiarity. But then something extraordinary happened. Instead of following the battle plan we'd spent hours perfecting, Captain Chen's voice crackled over the communications array. "All human units, you know what to do. Trust your instincts." What followed defied every principle of space combat I'd ever learned. Human fighters broke formation immediately, scattering in seemingly random directions. Their larger ships abandoned their assigned positions, moving in patterns that made no tactical sense according to my analysis. The Korthak fleet, which had been adapting to our previous strategies with mechanical precision, suddenly faltered. Their ships hesitated, trying to calculate responses to actions that followed no logical progression. While they paused to analyze this unexpected behavior, the humans struck. I watched in fascination as human pilots performed maneuvers that should have been impossible. They flew their ships not like precise instruments but like extensions of their own bodies, reacting to threats before sensors could even detect them. When Korthak vessels tried to predict their movements, the humans simply changed their approach entirely, doing something completely different from what they'd done before. But it was more than just unpredictability. There was something else happening, something I couldn't quite identify. The humans seemed connected to each other in ways that our communication systems couldn't detect. They coordinated without speaking, supported each other without orders, and adapted to changing situations with a speed that exceeded even the Korthak hive mind. During one particularly intense exchange, I watched a human fighter pilot named Rodriguez perform what could only be described as impossible. His ship was damaged, systems failing, surrounded by 3 Korthak interceptors. According to my calculations, he had a 0.3% chance of survival. Instead of following optimal escape protocols, Rodriguez did something unprecedented. He flew directly toward the largest enemy ship, accelerating beyond safe parameters, his damaged engines leaving a trail of sparks and plasma. The Korthak vessels converged on his position, exactly as tactical doctrine would predict. But at the last moment, Rodriguez didn't crash into the enemy ship as it appeared he would. Instead, he used its gravity well to slingshot around it, emerging behind the Korthak formation with perfect positioning to strike their vulnerable rear shields. The maneuver was beyond reckless. It was impossible to calculate in advance, requiring split-second timing and an intuitive understanding of physics that no computer could replicate. Yet somehow, Rodriguez had known exactly what would happen. Not calculated, not computed, known in a way that transcended logic. As I watched this human pilot destroy all 3 enemy ships with a series of moves that should have killed him, I began to understand that we'd been thinking about warfare all wrong. We'd been trying to perfect combat, to make it precise and predictable, but humans had discovered something else entirely. They'd learned to make war itself alive. The battle raged for 14 hours, and by the end of it I was questioning everything I thought I knew about my own species' capabilities. The humans had not only survived against impossible odds, they had won. Where the Korthak had destroyed 4 coalition fleets using conventional tactics, a mixed force with human elements had driven them back for the first time since the invasion began. But victory came with questions I couldn't answer. How had the humans done it? Their technology was inferior to ours, their ships slower, their weapons less precise. Yet they had fought with an effectiveness that defied mathematical analysis. After the battle, I found myself seeking out Captain Chen. She was in the human section of the ship, an area they had somehow transformed from sterile military quarters into something that felt oddly warm and alive. Pictures covered the walls, images of other humans, places, moments that seemed to hold meaning beyond their visual information. "You're troubled," she said without looking up from a report. She was writing by hand rather than using the ship's computer systems. "I am confused," I corrected, settling my elongated form into a chair that was definitely not designed for Velnari physiology. "Your tactics should not have worked. The mathematical probabilities were against you in every engagement." Captain Chen set down her writing instrument and looked at me with those deep eyes. "Math is useful, Zektar, but it's not everything. Sometimes you have to go beyond what the numbers tell you. That makes no logical sense. Mathematics describes reality. How can you go beyond reality?" She laughed, a sound that somehow conveyed both amusement and understanding. "You're thinking too small. Math describes what is, but humans live in what could be." Before I could ask what she meant, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in red as we rushed toward the command center. Admiral Tolovec was already there, his crystalline features reflecting the glow of tactical displays, showing a situation that made my internal calculations freeze with horror. 3 Korthak dreadnoughts had emerged from hyperspace directly behind our fleet. They must have calculated our position based on the previous battle, predicting where we would retreat to regroup. It was a perfect tactical maneuver. We were caught between the retreating remnants of the first Korthak force and this new massive threat. "Estimated time until optimal firing position?" Admiral Tolovec asked. 17 minutes, replied our tactical officer, her voice carrying the strain of processing multiple probability matrices simultaneously. Recommended action: immediate retreat to hyperspace. But Captain Chen stepped forward, studying the display with an intensity that seemed to make the air around her vibrate with potential energy. No, she said quietly. We don't run. Captain Chen, Admiral Tolvik's voice carried the weight of centuries of military experience. This is not a winnable scenario. Even with your unconventional methods, we are outnumbered 15-1. Numbers, she said, still staring at the tactical display. Always about the numbers. She turned to face the assembled command staff, and I saw something in her expression that made my scales tingle with an unfamiliar sensation. What if I told you that every human on this fleet is worth more than just one soldier? I wanted to ask what she meant. But before I could speak, she was already moving, issuing orders that made no sense according to any tactical doctrine I knew. All human units, prepare for Darwin Protocol, she announced over the fleet communications. I repeat, Darwin Protocol is now active. I had never heard of this protocol. Neither, apparently, had Admiral Tolvik, whose crystalline features shifted through several shades of confusion. Captain Chen, what is the Darwin Protocol? Her smile this time was different. Not the friendly expression I'd seen before, but something that reminded me uncomfortably of the predators from my homeworld. It's what happens when humans stop pretending to be civilized. What followed over the next 16 minutes challenged not just my understanding of tactics, but my comprehension of reality itself. The human ships began moving in patterns that violated every principle of fleet coordination. Instead of maintaining formation, they scattered like seeds in a storm, each vessel becoming an independent entity. But this wasn't the organized chaos I'd witnessed in the previous battle. This was something else entirely. The humans weren't just being unpredictable. They were becoming something fundamentally different from what they had been before. I watched through the sensors as human crew members throughout. The fleet began exhibiting behaviors that defied explanation. Their reaction times increased beyond what their biology should have allowed. They began anticipating events before sensors could detect them. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be sharing information without using any communication systems we could monitor. Lieutenant Rodriguez, the pilot I'd observed earlier, was now flying his fighter in ways that violated the laws of physics as I understood them. His ship moved through space as if it were alive, dodging weapons fire that hadn't been fired yet, attacking weak points that shouldn't have been visible to his sensors. How is he doing that? I asked the tactical officer monitoring his movements. She studied her displays for several long moments before responding with obvious confusion. I cannot determine the source of his targeting information. He is attacking components that are not visible on any of our scans. On the main display, I watched Rodriguez's fighter approach one of the massive Korthak dreadnoughts. The enemy ship was easily 1,000 times larger than his small craft, its armor designed to withstand bombardment from capital ship weapons. Yet Rodriguez flew directly toward its hull as if he knew exactly where to strike. His weapons should have been completely ineffective against such a target, but somehow, his energy bolts found their way into what appeared to be a tiny maintenance hatch buried deep within the dreadnought's superstructure. The result was a chain reaction that tore through the enemy ship's power systems, leaving it dead in space. That hatch was not marked on any of our intelligence reports, Admiral Tolovec said, his voice carrying a note I'd never heard before. How did he know where to find it? Captain Chen's expression remained focused on the battle, but I caught something in her voice that sent chills through my nervous system. He didn't know. He felt it. Across the fleet, similar impossible events were occurring. Human gunners were hitting targets that were beyond their weapon range. Engineers were repairing damage before systems failed. Tactical officers were coordinating strikes without communicating their plans. But most disturbing of all was what I began to sense from the humans themselves. There was something building among them, a connection that transcended their individual capabilities. It was as if the entire human contingent was becoming a single organism, each person functioning as a specialized cell within a larger entity. I realized I was witnessing the emergence of something that had no name in any language I knew. The humans weren't just fighting together. They were becoming something greater than the sum of their individual parts. They were evolving in real time, in response to the impossible situation they faced. The Korthak, with all their hive-mind coordination and mathematical precision, had never encountered anything like this. Their ships began making errors, small at first, then increasingly significant. They were trying to fight an enemy that was changing faster than they could adapt, and in the middle of it all I felt something stirring within myself, a resonance with the energy the humans were generating, a connection to something I had never known existed. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, like discovering I had senses I'd never used. For the first time in my life, I began to understand that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than any equation could describe. The sensation growing within me was unlike anything I had experienced in my 300 years of existence. It started as a tingling at the base of my skull, where my people's neural crest connected to our spinal column. But as the battle intensified, it became something more, a awareness that extended beyond my physical body. I could feel the human crew around me, not just their presence, but their emotions, their intentions, their sudden flashes of insight. It was overwhelming and impossible, yet undeniably real. My rational mind screamed that this was some form of mass hallucination, but the evidence was all around me. The tactical display showed Lieutenant Rodriguez's fighter weaving through a formation of Korthak interceptors. But I wasn't just watching anymore. Somehow I was experiencing fragments of what he felt, the weight of acceleration, the split-second decisions, the absolute certainty that came from somewhere beyond conscious thought. When he banked left to avoid a plasma burst, I felt the decision forming in his mind before his hands moved the controls. When he fired at an enemy ship, I sensed his understanding of exactly where to aim, knowledge that came not from his instruments but from a deeper source. "Captain Chen," I said, my voice strained with the effort of processing these impossible sensations. "What is happening to me?" She looked at me with those penetrating eyes, and for a moment, I felt as if she was seeing something about me that I didn't know existed. "You're opening up," she said simply. "Some species can do it, some can't. We weren't sure about the Velnari." "Opening up to what?" "To the field," she replied, turning back to the tactical display where human ships were performing maneuvers that grew more impossible with each passing moment. "That's what we call it, the connection that binds all conscious beings together. Most species never learn to access it, but humans have always been able to feel it to some degree." I wanted to protest that such a thing was scientifically impossible, that consciousness was contained within individual neural networks and couldn't extend beyond the boundaries of a single organism. But the evidence of my own senses was overwhelming. I could feel the minds around me, human and non-human alike, connected by invisible threads of awareness. The battle reached a turning point when the largest Korthak dreadnought began charging what our sensors identified as a planet-killer weapon. The energy readings were off the scale. A single shot could destroy our entire fleet and leave nothing but scattered atoms. "All ships." "Evasive maneuvers," Admiral Tolovec commanded, but his voice carried the hopelessness of mathematics. There was nowhere to run. The weapon's range encompassed our entire formation, and we didn't have enough time to reach hyperspace. But Captain Chen stepped forward, her face calm despite the approaching annihilation. "All human units, prepare for Unity Protocol." "Captain," Admiral Tolovec said urgently, "we must retreat immediately. No known defense can stop that weapon." "You're right," she replied. "No known defense." Her emphasis on the word known sent chills through my scales. But humans have always specialized in the unknown. What happened next will haunt my understanding of reality for the rest of my existence. Every human on every ship in the fleet suddenly became still, their movements synchronized in a way that transcended physical coordination. I could feel them in the field, their individual consciousness merging into something that was both many and one. The sensation was like standing at the edge of an ocean of mind, feeling the vast depth of collective human awareness stretching beyond the horizon of my perception. Through our connection, I experienced fragments of what they were doing, not thinking, not calculating, but becoming something that existed beyond individual limitations. On the tactical display, I watched as every human-controlled weapon in the fleet began moving in perfect unison. Not the mechanical precision of computer coordination, but something organic, alive, responsive to intentions that formed and changed faster than electronic signals could travel. The Korthak planet killer fired, releasing a beam of destructive energy that should have vaporized our entire fleet. But in that moment, something impossible happened. Every human weapon fired simultaneously, their combined energy forming not a scattered barrage but a single coherent force that met the enemy beam head-on. Physics should have made this impossible. The combined output of our weapons was still orders of magnitude less than the planet killer. But the humans weren't just adding their energy together. They were transforming it into something different, something that operated according to principles that had no name in our scientific databases. The collision between the two energy streams created a phenomenon I had never seen before. Instead of the expected explosion, reality itself seemed to bend around the impact point. Space twisted, light curved in impossible directions, and for a brief moment I glimpsed something that my mind struggled to process. It was as if the universe had layers, and the humans had learned to reach through the surface layer into something deeper. In that deeper layer, the rules were different. Energy could be shaped by will, matter could be influenced by intention, and the boundaries between individual consciousness became meaningless. Through my connection to the field, I felt Lieutenant Rodriguez and thousands of other humans reaching into that deeper layer, drawing power from a source that existed beyond physical reality. They weren't violating the laws of physics. They were accessing laws that operated on a different level entirely. The Korthak planet killer beam struck their combined defense and simply stopped. Not reflected, not absorbed, but negated at a fundamental level. The energy that should have destroyed us instead dispersed harmlessly into space, leaving the enemy dreadnought's weapon systems overloaded and useless. But the effort of reaching so deeply into the field came with a cost. I felt the humans' exhaustion as their unity began to fragment, individual consciousness reasserting itself as they pulled back from the deeper layers of reality. Many of them collapsed at their stations, overwhelmed by an experience that pushed the boundaries of what their minds could handle. Captain Chen swayed on her feet, her face pale but her eyes still burning with the intensity of what they had accomplished. "Status report," she said, her voice hoarse. "Impossible," Admiral Tolovec whispered, staring at the tactical display where the Korthak fleet was retreating in apparent confusion. "What you just did? It shouldn't be possible." "That's what makes us human," Captain Chen replied with a tired smile. "We specialize in impossible things." I felt the field connection beginning to fade as the humans recovered from their unified effort, but something had changed within me permanently. I could still sense the underlying web of consciousness that connected all living beings, though it was much fainter now. More importantly, I had glimpsed the deeper layers of reality that the humans could access. "How long have your people known about this?" I asked Captain Chen as medical teams attended to the exhausted human crew members. "Always," she said. "It's part of what makes us human. We just feel things. We know things without knowing how we know them. Your people call it intuition and dismiss it as unscientific. But intuition is just consciousness touching something bigger than itself." I thought about the mathematical precision my people valued so highly, the careful calculations and logical analysis that had always defined our approach to existence. All of it suddenly seemed limited, like trying to understand an ocean by measuring a single drop of water. "Can other species learn to access the field as humans do?" I asked. Captain Chen studied me with those penetrating eyes again, and I felt her awareness brush against mine through the fading connection. "Some can," she said finally, "but it requires letting go of the need to understand everything. It means accepting that reality is bigger and stranger than any equation can describe." As the human fleet began forming up for the journey home, I realized that this battle had changed more than just military tactics. The humans had revealed the existence of something that challenged the fundamental assumptions upon which galactic civilization was built. Had always believed that consciousness was limited to individual minds, that reality operated according to fixed physical laws, and that the universe was essentially mechanical in nature. But the humans had demonstrated something else entirely, that consciousness could transcend individual boundaries, that reality had layers accessible to sufficiently unified minds, and that the universe itself might be far more alive than we had ever imagined. The implications were staggering. If humans could access these deeper layers of reality through unity and intuition, what other possibilities existed? What other capabilities might be waiting to be discovered by species willing to abandon the comfortable limitations of purely rational thought? I looked around the command center, at the exhausted humans and the confused expressions of my fellow coalition officers. and realized that we were witnessing the beginning of something unprecedented. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had opened a door to possibilities that would reshape our understanding of existence itself. The journey back to Coalition space took 12 days, and during that time, everything changed. Not just for me, but for every non-human crew member who had witnessed what the humans could do. The careful divisions between species that had defined Coalition society for centuries began to blur as we struggled to understand what we had experienced. I found myself spending most of my time in the human sections of the ship, not because I preferred their company, but because being near them allowed me to sense echoes of the field. It was addictive in a way that concerned my rational mind, yet I couldn't stay away. The glimpses of expanded awareness were like discovering a new sense I never knew I possessed. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the fleet's human xenobiologist, had begun conducting informal studies on how the field affected other species. She was particularly interested in my experiences, since the Velnari had never shown any sensitivity to what humans called extrasensory phenomena. Your neural structure is actually quite compatible, she explained as we sat in her improvised laboratory, surrounded by readings and data that made no sense according to conventional science. The crystalline matrices in your nervous system seem to resonate with the same frequencies humans use to access the field. But we've never detected these frequencies before, I protested. Our instruments are far more sensitive than human technology. Elena smiled, an expression I was beginning to recognize as uniquely human patience with others' limitations. That's because you've been looking for the wrong thing. The field isn't electromagnetic or gravitational or any other force your instruments can measure. It's something else entirely. Consciousness touching consciousness across the quantum foam that underlies reality. Her words should have sounded like mysticism, but I had felt the truth of them during the battle. There was indeed something deeper than the physical universe, something that operated according to principles that transcended the mathematics my people had spent millennia perfecting. 3 days into our journey home, something unexpected happened. I was working late in the Weapons Coordination Center, trying to analyze the impossible maneuvers the human fighters had performed, when I felt a familiar tingling sensation at the base of my skull. At first, I thought it was just the residual effects of my earlier exposure to the field. But as the sensation grew stronger, I realized that someone was trying to make contact with me through the deeper layers of consciousness. The sensation was gentle but insistent, like a hand reaching through dark water. Without conscious thought, I found myself responding, allowing my awareness to extend beyond the boundaries of my physical form. The connection formed slowly at first, then with increasing clarity until I could sense another mind touching mine. It was Lieutenant Rodriguez. His thoughts came to me not as words, but as direct understanding, flavored with emotions and sensations that human language couldn't convey. He was 3 decks below me in the fighter bay, working on repairs to his damaged ship. But through the field connection, it was as if we were in the same room. "You're learning," his thoughts conveyed, along with approval and something that might have been friendship. "Captain Chen said some of you might be able to develop the sensitivity. How is this possible?" I responded, amazed to discover that I could transmit thoughts as clearly as I received them. "Everything is connected," came his reply, along with images and sensations that showed me his understanding of the field. "Humans just learned to feel the connections that were always there. Your people have the capability too. You just trained yourselves not to use it." Over the following days, the connection between us grew stronger. Rodriguez began teaching me techniques the humans used to access and navigate the field, methods that had been passed down through their culture for generations, often disguised as meditation, intuition training, or artistic expression. I learned that human children naturally accessed the field until their education systems taught them to rely primarily on rational thought. Most humans retained some sensitivity throughout their lives, the ability to sense when they were being watched, to feel the emotions of others, to know things without knowing how they knew them. But only a few, like military personnel and artists, learned to consciously develop these abilities. "It's not magic," Rodriguez explained during one of our mental conversations. "It's just a part of consciousness that most species ignore. Humans embrace it because we've always known that logic alone isn't enough to understand reality." As news of my developing abilities spread through the ship, other non-human crew members began approaching me with questions. The Kalari engineer named Teleth had started experiencing precognitive flashes during routine maintenance work. A Zephyrian navigator called Wispwind found herself knowing the optimal course corrections before her instruments calculated them. Most remarkably, we discovered that these new abilities weren't limited to individuals. When several of us attempted to access the field simultaneously, our combined awareness became something greater than the sum of its parts, though not nearly as powerful as what the humans could achieve when they unified their consciousness. Captain Chen observed our development with interest, but also with caution. "The field can be dangerous if you try to go too deep too fast," she warned during one of our informal training sessions. "Human children spend years learning to navigate it safely. You're trying to compress that learning into days." Her concern proved justified when Teleth attempted to access deeper layers of the field than he was prepared for. I was practicing mental exercises with Rodriguez when we felt Teleth's consciousness suddenly expand far beyond normal parameters. Through our growing connection, we experienced his mind touching something vast and alien, something that existed in the deepest layers of reality. The contact lasted only seconds, but it left Teleth unconscious for 6 hours. When he recovered, he spoke of having glimpsed entities that existed purely as consciousness, beings that had transcended physical form eons ago. They had been aware of the developing galactic civilization, he claimed, but had remained hidden because most species weren't ready for contact with pure mind. "They're coming," Teleth said, his voice carrying uncertainty that sent chills through everyone present. "The field disturbances we've been creating have attracted their attention. They want to make contact with the humans." Captain Chen's reaction to this news was immediate and decisive. She called an emergency meeting of all senior officers, human and non-human alike. The briefing room felt different now, charged with the invisible connections we had been developing. I could sense the emotional undercurrents flowing between the assembled beings: excitement, fear, anticipation, and uncertainty. "If Teleth is correct," Captain Chen began, "we may be about to make first contact with a form of life that existed before our civilizations began. The implications are staggering." Admiral Tolovek's crystalline features shifted through several configurations before settling on what I recognized as deep concern. "Are we prepared for such contact? These beings could possess capabilities far beyond anything we've encountered." "That's exactly why we need to be ready," Elena interjected. "If they're drawn to field activity, they've probably been watching human development for centuries. They may have been waiting for us to reach a certain level of consciousness evolution." The discussion continued for hours, but I found my attention drawn to something else. Through my developing field sensitivity, I could detect subtle changes in the fabric of space around our ship. Reality itself seemed to be fluctuating, as if something enormous was moving through dimensions we couldn't perceive. Rodriguez noticed my distraction and sent a questioning thought through our mental link. When I shared what I was sensing, his mental presence immediately sharpened with alertness. "They're already here," he transmitted to me, his thoughts carrying a mixture of awe and apprehension. "Can you feel them?" I extended my awareness as far as I dared, reaching into the deeper layers of the field that I was only beginning to understand. There, in the spaces between thoughts, I sensed presences of incredible age and wisdom. They felt vast, ancient, and utterly alien, yet somehow familiar, as if they were connected to the same source of consciousness that linked all living beings. One of the presences noticed my tentative contact and responded, with a gentle touch that flooded my mind with images and concepts I struggled to process. I saw the birth of galaxies, the evolution of consciousness across millions of worlds, and the slow development of species toward greater unity and understanding. But most remarkably, I saw humanity's role in this cosmic evolution. The humans weren't just another intelligent species. They were catalysts, beings whose natural connection to the field could help other races access capabilities they never knew they possessed. The ancient entities had been waiting for the humans to develop sufficient unity to serve as bridges between physical and purely conscious existence. The contact lasted only moments before I pulled back, overwhelmed by the vastness of what I had touched. But in those moments I understood something that would change the course of galactic civilization forever. We weren't just dealing with advanced beings from another dimension. We were encountering the next stage of evolutionary development, a state of existence that all consciousness was moving toward. The humans had naturally developed abilities that would allow them to guide other species toward this transcendent state. The war with the Korthak had been only the beginning. We were about to embark on a journey that would reshape not just our understanding of reality, but our very nature as conscious beings. Contact came at 0347 hours ship time, while most of the crew slept. I was awake, practicing the mental exercises Rodriguez had taught me when reality suddenly shifted around us. The familiar hum of the ship's engines faded to silence, replaced by something that wasn't quite sound but felt like the universe itself was breathing. Through the field, I sensed every conscious being on the ship awakening simultaneously, not to alarms or emergency signals, but to a presence so vast and ancient that it commanded attention simply by existing. Emergency lighting activated automatically as ship systems detected something they couldn't classify, bathing the corridors in a soft blue glow that seemed somehow alive. I made my way to the observation deck, following an impulse that came from beyond conscious thought. Others were doing the same, humans and non-humans alike, all drawn by the same invisible pull toward the ship's largest viewport. Captain Chen was already there, standing perfectly still as she gazed out at something that challenged the mind's ability to process. Space itself had changed. Where before there had been the familiar darkness punctuated by distant stars, now there were structures that existed in more dimensions than human perception could fully grasp. They weren't ships in any sense we understood, but rather constructs of crystallized consciousness, geometric forms that folded through spaces that didn't exist in normal reality. "They're beautiful," whispered Dr. Vasquez, her voice carrying a reverence I'd never heard before. And they were beautiful, in a way that transcended visual aesthetics. The entity's presence radiated harmony, wisdom, and a peace so profound it made our previous concepts of serenity seem like mere shadows. But it was through the field that their true nature became apparent. When I extended my consciousness toward them, I encountered minds so vast and complex that my individual awareness felt like a candle flame before a star, yet there was no sense of superiority or condescension from them. Instead, they radiated the patient kindness of teachers waiting for students to be ready for the next lesson. One of the entities focused its attention on our ship, and suddenly we all shared a direct communication that bypassed language entirely. Concepts, emotions, and understanding flowed into our minds with crystalline clarity. "Greetings, young ones. We are what you might call the Ascended, beings who have moved beyond the need for physical form. We have watched your development with great interest, particularly the emergence of field sensitivity among your diverse species. The communication came with layers of meaning that our individual minds struggled to process. I sensed images of cosmic history spanning millions of years, the rise and fall of countless civilizations, and the gradual evolution of consciousness toward greater unity and understanding. The humans among you have natural access to abilities that most species must develop over millennia. This makes them uniquely suited to serve as bridges between the physical and transcendent realms. But they cannot complete this evolution alone." Captain Chen stepped forward, her mind radiating the focused determination that had served her so well in battle. Through the field, I felt her formulating a response that somehow encompassed the thoughts and questions of our entire crew. "What do you want from us?" she projected, her mental voice clear and strong despite the vast difference in their respective consciousness levels. "Not want, offer," came the reply, accompanied by concepts that made my neural structure tingle with possibility. "Your species stands at a crossroads. You can continue developing as separate entities, each bound by the limitations of individual consciousness. Or you can learn to transcend those boundaries, becoming something greater while retaining your unique identities." Images flowed through the communication, visions of what galactic civilization could become if consciousness evolution progressed. I saw worlds where multiple species worked together, not just through technology and language, but through direct mind-to-mind connection. Conflicts resolved through shared understanding rather than force. Scientific discoveries made through collective intuition rather than just logical analysis. But the images also showed the challenges ahead. Not all species would be ready for such evolution. Some would resist the changes, fearing the loss of individual identity. Others would attempt to use these new abilities for domination rather than cooperation. "The choice is yours," the entity continued. "We offer knowledge and guidance, but the path must be walked willingly. Consciousness cannot be forced to evolve. It must choose its own growth. Lieutenant Rodriguez stepped forward, his mind radiating curiosity mixed with caution. What about the Korthak? They're still out there, still threatening inhabited worlds. The entity's response carried what I could only interpret as cosmic sadness. The Korthak represent consciousness that chose a different path, unity through absorption rather than cooperation. They have become so focused on collective efficiency that they have lost the ability to grow beyond their current state. They will continue to be a threat until they choose to change or are stopped by those willing to defend diversity of thought. The implications were staggering. The war we had been fighting was not just about territory or resources, but about fundamental approaches to consciousness evolution. The Korthak represented one possible future, perfect unity achieved through the elimination of individual differences. The path the Ascended offered promised unity, while preserving the unique perspectives that made diversity valuable. How do we begin? I found myself asking, surprised by my own boldness in addressing such ancient and powerful beings. You have already begun, came the reply, along with a warmth that felt like approval. You're developing sensitivity to the field. You're growing connections with beings of other species. Your willingness to question the limitations you have always accepted. These are the first steps. Over the next several hours, the entity shared knowledge that would have taken our scientists centuries to discover on their own. We learned techniques for deepening field sensitivity, methods for creating stable mental connections across species boundaries, and most importantly, ways to access the deeper layers of reality without losing ourselves in the process. The training was unlike anything in our educational systems. Instead of memorizing information, we experienced direct transfer of understanding. Complex concepts became intuitively obvious. Abilities that should have required years to develop manifested within hours. But the most profound change was in how we related to each other. The barriers between species consciousness began dissolving as we learned to share not just thoughts, but the deeper essence of our individual perspectives. I found myself understanding what it meant to experience reality through human senses, while Rodriguez gained insight into the crystalline precision of Velnari perception. Dr. Vasquez made a breakthrough when she successfully connected with Teliath and me simultaneously, creating a three-species mental link that allowed us to solve engineering problems through collective intuition. What would have taken days of analysis and calculation was accomplished in minutes through direct consciousness integration. This is just the beginning, Captain Chen observed as we practiced these new abilities. If we can teach this to others, if we can spread this understanding throughout the coalition. But the entity's response carried a note of caution. Knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. These abilities must be developed gradually, with proper safeguards and ethical foundations. The universe has seen species destroy themselves by advancing too quickly, without the maturity to handle their new capabilities. As our training session continued, I became aware of something else, and we were being observed, not by the ascended entity, but by other consciousness that felt familiar yet somehow wrong. Through the field, I sensed the distinctive mental signature of Korthak scouts. Their hive-mind awareness probing at the edges of our consciousness expansion. They had detected the massive field disturbances caused by our contact with the ascended, and they were coming to investigate. But this time they wouldn't find the same limited opponents they had fought before. We had allies now whose capabilities extended far beyond anything the Korthak had encountered. The entity confirmed my growing awareness with a mental communication that carried both warning and reassurance. The Korthak approach, drawn by the consciousness evolution occurring here, this will be a test of your new abilities, but also an opportunity to offer them a different path. Even the most rigid consciousness can choose to change if presented with sufficient reason. As alarms began sounding throughout the ship and our sensors detected the approaching Korthak fleet, I realized we were about to participate in more than just another battle. We were going to attempt something that had never been tried before, using consciousness itself as a weapon for peace, trying to reach minds that had been closed to individual thought for millennia. The real test of our evolution was about to begin. The Korthak fleet that emerged from hyperspace was unlike anything we had faced before. Where their previous forces had been large but conventional, this fleet defied understanding. Their ships moved in perfect synchronization. But more disturbing was what I sensed through the field. They weren't just coordinated. They were becoming a single massive consciousness that spanned dozens of vessels. "They're adapting," Captain Chen observed, her voice tight with concern as she studied the tactical displays. "They've learned from our previous encounters and evolved their hive mind capabilities. Through my expanded awareness, I could feel the Korthak collective consciousness like a dark tide pressing against the edges of our field sensitivity. It was vast, cold, and utterly alien in its perfect unity. There were no individual thoughts within it, no dissenting voices or creative sparks, just pure, mechanical efficiency focused on a single goal: absorption of all diverse consciousness. The ascended entity's presence grew stronger around us, its ancient mind radiating calm determination. "This is why you needed to develop these abilities quickly," came its mental communication. "The Korthak have also been evolving, but they have chosen a path that leads to stagnation. They must be shown there is another way." "What exactly are you suggesting?" Admiral Tolvek asked, his crystalline features shifting through configurations I'd never seen before. The approaching Korthak fleet was easily 10 times larger than anything we could handle through conventional tactics. "Not destruction, but transformation," the entity replied. "Your growing consciousness network must reach into theirs and plant seeds of individual thought. If even a few Korthak minds can be reminded of what it means to be separate, unique, creative, their entire collective structure will begin to change." The plan that formed through our mental connections was audacious beyond belief. Instead of fighting the Korthak fleet with weapons, we would fight their consciousness with consciousness. The humans would provide the foundation, their natural field abilities serving as anchors for a mental network that would include every sensitive being on our ship. But the risks were enormous. To penetrate the Korthak hive mind, we would have to extend our consciousness far beyond the safe limits we had been practicing. There was a very real possibility that instead of changing them, we might be absorbed into their collective, losing our individual identities forever. "I volunteer to lead the mental assault," Rodriguez announced, his thoughts radiating through our growing network with determined courage. "I've had the most experience with deep field access." "No," Captain Chen replied firmly. "This requires more than individual bravery. We need to link our consciousness so completely that we become something the Korthak have never encountered, a collective that preserves individuality." Over the next hour, as the Korthak fleet moved into attack position, we prepared for the most unprecedented battle in galactic history. Dr. Vasquez worked frantically to establish safe mental connection protocols between all the field-sensitive beings on our ship. Teleth and I served as bridges between human and non-human consciousness, helping to stabilize a network that spanned multiple species. The process was terrifying and exhilarating. As our individual minds linked together, I experienced reality through dozens of different perspectives simultaneously. I felt Rodriguez's human intuition, Teleth's Kalari emotional sensitivity, Wispwind's Zephyrian spatial awareness, and Captain Chen's fierce determination all flowing through the same consciousness network. But we weren't becoming a hive mind like the Korthak. Instead, we were becoming something new, a symphony of consciousness where individual voices remained distinct while harmonizing into something greater. Each perspective enhanced the others without diminishing their unique qualities. The ascended entity served as our guide and stabilizer, its vast consciousness providing a framework that kept our merged awareness from fragmenting under the strain. Through its guidance, we learned to maintain our individual identities while functioning as a unified whole. When the Korthak fleet opened fire, we were ready. Instead of dodging their weapons or returning fire with our own, we did something they couldn't have anticipated. Our consciousness network reached out across space, following the energy beams back to their sources, and penetrated the Korthak ship's mental defenses. The contact was like diving into an ocean of liquid metal, cold, dense, and hostile to individual thought. The Korthak hive mind was even more alien than I had imagined. It wasn't just that they shared thoughts. They had no concept that thoughts could be private or individual. The very idea of a separate self was incomprehensible to them. But that incomprehension became our weapon. As our diverse consciousness network touched theirs, we brought with us something they had never experienced: the chaotic, creative, unpredictable beauty of individual minds working in harmony rather than uniformity. I felt Rodriguez's memories of flying alone through empty space, the solitary joy of testing his limits against the void. Teleth contributed his experiences of solving problems through emotional intuition rather than logical analysis. Captain Chen shared her understanding of leadership through inspiration rather than control. Each individual perspective we introduced into the Korthak network was like a virus of creativity infecting a perfectly ordered system. For the first time in millennia, individual Korthak minds began to remember what it was like to think alone, to have private thoughts, to question rather than simply accept. The effect rippled through their fleet like a chain reaction. Ships began breaking formation as their crews experienced the confusion and wonder of individual consciousness. Some Korthak minds recoiled from the experience, diving deeper into the collective to escape the chaos of personal identity. But others embraced it, remembering aspects of themselves they had forgotten existed. One ship, then another. Then a dozen began transmitting on frequencies the collective had never used. Individual voices speaking their own thoughts, rather than echoing the hive mind's commands. The perfect synchronization of the Korthak fleet began to unravel as independent decision-making spread through their ranks. But our success came with a price. Maintaining the consciousness network while penetrating an actively hostile hive mind pushed all of us beyond our limits. I felt Rodriguez's mind beginning to fragment under the strain, while Teleth's consciousness started to drift too far into the Korthak collective. Just as I thought we might lose ourselves in the chaos we had created, the ascended entity's presence surged through our network, providing the stability we needed to maintain cohesion while continuing the mental assault. Hold together came its mental guidance. You are showing them what they lost when they chose perfect unity over creative diversity. Some will reject this gift, but others will remember what it means to be truly alive. Through the field, I witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. Korthak ships began requesting communication with us, but not through their usual hive mind channels. Individual captains, remembering what it was like to command their own vessels, wanted to understand what they had experienced. The largest Korthak dreadnought suddenly broke away from the fleet formation entirely. Its captain, a Korthak mind that had somehow retained fragments of individual identity despite centuries in the collective, sent a transmission that carried the confusion and wonder of rediscovered selfhood. I remember having a name, the transmission began. The concepts barely fitting through communication channels designed for hive mind efficiency. Before the joining, before the perfection, I was called Vorthak. I had preferences, opinions, dreams that were mine alone. The effect of this transmission on the rest of the Korthak fleet was electric. More individual voices began emerging from the collective, each one weakening the hive mind's control and strengthening the chaos of personal consciousness. But not all of the Korthak embraced this change. The core vessels of their fleet, those containing the oldest and most deeply integrated hive mind components, rejected individual consciousness entirely. They began targeting the ships where independent thought was emerging, trying to destroy the infection of individuality before it could spread further. A civil war erupted within the Korthak fleet as individual consciousness fought against collective uniformity. Ships that had worked in perfect harmony minutes before now fired upon each other, the chaos of personal disagreement replacing the cold efficiency of shared purpose. Through our consciousness network, we felt the anguish of minds caught between two forms of existence. Some Korthak desperately wanted to return to the safety of hive mind unity, while others clung to their rediscovered individuality, despite its frightening uncertainty. The battle was no longer between our species and theirs. It had become a struggle for the soul of consciousness itself, with individual identity fighting against the seductive promise of perfect unity and shared purpose. And in the midst of this chaos, I realized that we had accomplished something extraordinary. We hadn't just defeated an enemy fleet. We had offered an entire species the chance to choose what kind of consciousness they wanted to be. The aftermath of the consciousness battle left us fundamentally changed. As our mental network slowly dissolved back into individual awareness, I found that the experience had altered not just my perception, but my very understanding of what it meant to exist as a conscious being. The Korthak fleet hung in space around us, no longer a unified threat but a collection of vessels caught between two evolutionary paths. Some ships had fully embraced individual consciousness, their crews struggling to learn how to function as separate beings after millennia of collective existence. Others remained locked in hive mind unity, viewing the emergence of independent thought as a disease to be eliminated. Captain Vorthak's dreadnought had become the unofficial center of the consciousness revolution within Korthak space. Through our field connections, I could sense his mind grappling with concepts that his species had abandoned eons ago. Personal responsibility, individual creativity, the terrifying freedom of choice. The collective is angry, he transmitted to us, his mental voice carrying uncertainty that would have been impossible in a true hive mind. Those who remain unified see us as corrupted, broken. They gather their forces to restore what they call proper order. The ascended entity's presence had become a constant stabilizing force in our expanded awareness, helping us process the magnitude of what we had accomplished. Through its ancient perspective, I began to understand that we had participated in something that occurred perhaps once every million years, a fundamental shift in how consciousness evolved in the galaxy. You have given them the greatest gift possible, the entity communicated to our assembled group. The choice to become something more than they were. But choice brings responsibility, and some will reject both the gift and the responsibility it entails. Over the following days, as news of the consciousness revolution spread through both Coalition and Korthak space, the political implications became clear. The galaxy was about to fracture along entirely new lines, not based on species or territory, but on fundamental approaches to consciousness itself. Some Coalition worlds embraced the new field abilities, establishing training centers where multiple species could learn to develop consciousness networks while preserving individual identity. The techniques we had pioneered became the foundation for unprecedented cooperation between different forms of life. But other Coalition members viewed the consciousness revolution with deep suspicion. They saw the field abilities as dangerous, unpredictable powers that threatened the careful balance of galactic civilization. Several worlds actually banned field sensitivity training, fearing it would lead to the same hive mind absorption that had consumed the Korthak. The humans found themselves in an unexpected position as teachers and guides for consciousness evolution. Their natural field abilities, which had once seemed like primitive intuition, were now recognized as the key to transcending individual limitations without losing personal identity. Dr. Vasquez established the first Interspecies Consciousness Institute on Luna, where beings from dozens of different worlds came to learn the mental techniques that could bridge the gap between separation and unity. I was among the first non-human instructors, helping to develop protocols that could safely expand consciousness across species boundaries. But the most profound changes were personal. My relationship with Lieutenant Rodriguez had evolved far beyond friendship, into something that didn't have a name in any language. Through our field connection, we shared not just thoughts but the deeper essence of what made us unique individuals. I experienced reality through his human perspective while he gained insight into the crystalline precision of Velnari consciousness. Yet we remained distinctly ourselves, our individual identities enhanced rather than diminished by the connection. This was the crucial difference between what we were developing and the Korthak collective. We were learning to share consciousness while celebrating the diversity that made sharing worthwhile. The war against the unreformed. Korthak continued, but it had become something entirely different from traditional conflict. Instead of fighting for territory or resources, we were defending the right of consciousness to evolve freely, to choose its own path toward greater unity, without sacrificing the individual perspectives that made growth possible. Captain Chen had been promoted to Admiral and placed in charge of the new Consciousness Defense Force, a mixed-species organization dedicated to protecting worlds where field abilities were being developed. Her understanding of both traditional military tactics and consciousness networking made her uniquely qualified to handle threats that operated on multiple levels of reality. The reformed Korthak, led by beings like Vorthak, who had embraced individual consciousness, became unlikely allies in this new form of warfare. Their intimate knowledge of hive mind structures made them invaluable in developing defenses against collective absorption techniques. But perhaps the most remarkable development was the emergence of hybrid consciousness networks, temporary alliances between multiple species that could accomplish tasks impossible for any individual group. These networks were voluntary, limited in duration, and designed to enhance rather than replace individual awareness. I participated in one such network during a rescue mission on a world threatened by unreformed Korthak forces. The network included humans, Velnari, Kalari, Zephyrians, and even several reformed Korthak, who had retained their individual identities. Together, we became something that was simultaneously many in one, capable of solving problems that would have challenged the most advanced computers. Through the network, we successfully evacuated 3 million civilians in under 6 hours, coordinating rescue efforts across an entire planet through direct consciousness connection. Each participant contributed their species' unique strengths, while maintaining their personal identity and decision-making autonomy. The experience left me with a profound understanding of what the galaxy was becoming. We were witnessing the birth of a new form of civilization, one based not on the dominance of any single species or ideology, but on the voluntary cooperation of diverse consciousness, choosing to work together while remaining fundamentally themselves. The ascended entity, which had served as our guide through this transformation, gradually withdrew its direct influence as we became capable of maintaining our own consciousness networks. But its final communication contained a promise that filled me with wonder and anticipation. This is only the beginning. It transmitted as its presence faded from our awareness. When your species achieve true consciousness unity, while preserving individual diversity, you will be ready for the next stage of evolution. Others wait in the deeper layers of reality, beings who have transcended even our current limitations. But that is a journey for another time. As I stood on the observation deck of our ship, watching the stars that now seemed alive with the potential for consciousness connection, I reflected on how much had changed since that first battle against the Korthak. We had started as separate species fighting a conventional war, but we had become something unprecedented, a confederation of consciousness exploring the infinite possibilities of unified diversity. The power I had found fighting beside humans wasn't just the ability to access the field or connect minds across species boundaries. It was the understanding that consciousness itself was the true frontier, the final territory to be explored and transformed. We had learned that the universe was not just filled with life, but with awareness itself, waiting to be discovered and embraced by beings willing to transcend their individual limitations without losing what made them unique. The galaxy stretched before us, no longer a collection of separate worlds and species, but a vast network of potential consciousness connections waiting to be explored. And at the center of it all were the humans, the unlikely catalysts who had shown us that the greatest power in the universe was not technology or weapons, but the courage to reach beyond ourselves while remaining true to who we were. The revolution was complete, but the evolution had only just begun.